The war ended in 1865. The country was wide open to new waves of immigrants. And when Sweden suffered disastrous harvests in 1867 and 1868, the pressure to emigrate became explosive. Thousands upon thousands of poor and landless Swedes said goodbye to their native land. The Great Migration to America had begun. This event, perhaps the single most important chapter in Swedish history, lasted about 50 years. During that time, almost 1.25 million Swedes, 1 in every 5, had left for America.
His name was Carl Siegfried Carlson, and he grew up in a small, not even a hamlet, I don't think, in Larspool. You were there, Gladys.
Yeah, most down the country.
Yeah, in the country, right. And,
what's the name?
And I was there. I was there in 1931.
And this is his home, right? It's where he was brought up, right there.
And I was sort of impressed, even at that young age, of how poor agricultural place it was.
Mm-hmm.
Just granite rock, you know, and very, very few fertile places where they could grow things. And
Forced from their homeland by poor agricultural and economic conditions, these Swedes saw in America an opportunity. Those with rural backgrounds found their opportunity in the countryside. The seemingly endless supply of inexpensive and free homestead land proved irresistible. Most settled in the northern tier of states, New England and upstate New York, the upper Midwest, and the Pacific Northwest. They worked as farmers, lumberjacks, miners, and laborers. Here pushed westward, so did Swedish pioneers, establishing ethnic neighborhoods of substantial size called Swede towns in many cities along the way. Swedes who settled in urban areas worked in the building trades, as small businessmen, and in the professions. Women often worked as domestics in factories or in laundries. They also settled in smaller cities and towns, which are still identified as Swedish communities. Places like Worcester, Massachusetts, Jamestown, New York.
Father was born Carl Siegfried Carlson. He was always known as C.S. Carlson, and in Jamestown as Baptist Carlson. He was born on June 9, 1883 in Alingsås in the province of Västergötland in Sweden. Alingsås is about a 1 hour's drive from Göteborg, the second largest city in Sweden. My dad was the youngest child of Carl Johnson and Charlotte Anderson. As you will recall, in Sweden, you took the first name of your father, and that became your last name. Hence, my father's last name became Carlson. Chance to visit the home in 1981 and have many fond recollections. This is the home where my dad was brought up. The slaughterhouse where they butchered animals, and the church which my dad attended. The cemetery next to the church is where my grandparents are buried, as well as Alvin, Dad's brother. He is buried on top of them, probably for lack of space. The church had special pews up front for the dignitaries. We've learned from family members that the first of the Carl Johnson family to come to the United States was Alvin Carlson, the eldest brother. He arrived around 1890 and went to Austin, Pennsylvania. His son was Henry, who we as a family visited so often in Dassel, Minnesota, where he operated a general country store with his wife, Josephine. Alvin, with his wife, Carolyn Olson, returned to Sweden after a few years for reasons of poor health. The next to arrive was Ada Carlson, who arrived in 1891. She came to Jamestown and got married to Aaron Sandberg and then moved to Austin, Pennsylvania until 1911, and had 2 daughters, Esther and Elsie. Then came Brother Oscar, in 1893, who also went to Austin. He married Matilda Olson, and she was a sister of Alvin's wife of Austin, and they had 1 daughter, Martha Rockman. Then came a 3rd brother, Robert Carlson, in 1897, who also lived in Austin until 1906, when he moved to Everett, Washington, and married Elsie. They had no children. Finally, my dad, on August 23, 1903, at the age of 20, immigrated from Sweden by traveling to Gothenburg, taking a steamer to Hull, England, a train to Liverpool, England, and then taking the Avernia ship into the port of Boston. From there, he moved to Austin, Pennsylvania, where he resided with Ada and Aaron Sandberg, who had a boarding house. Ida, the eldest sister, was the only one to remain in Sweden and married Wilhelm, which in English is William Aronson. They had 8 children. Lyle and I visited the 3 youngest children while in Sweden. Holger, the bachelor, still lived in the old homestead, and that was such a treat to be able to see the home and countryside where Dad was brought up. I cried, naturally.
Came to the United States in 1902 for religious freedom and to avoid the draft, he said. He had become a born-again Christian there through an evangelist he'd heard in his area in Sweden.
Many of there were a large number of the young fellows would leave Sweden at the age of 19 to avoid military service. Now, I can't say specifically that my dad did it, but a lot of them did. He, like a lot of them, probably came because they had a better life there than they would in the old country, they thought.
Yeah, they were very poor.
Yeah, and
they were very poor in the old country at that time.
But his intent, apparently, was that he was going to return after 2 years when he saved a little money.
Arrived in New York City by boat. He had to wait before he could get his train a while. And he bought some beautiful red fruit. And he thought they were apples. And on the train, he took a bite of one and the juice ran all over him. Well, back then, they had the train windows open for you to get air. And he thought they tasted terrible, so he sailed a whole bag out of the train window. They were really tomatoes, but he didn't know because he'd never seen them before.
Settled in Austin, Pennsylvania.
Because of the lumbering industry, and he left Sweden because they had a feudal system at that time where there was big landowners, and you worked for these landowners from the time that you were able to walk in some capacity or other. The boys, as they became young men, kept on working at this particular farm.
Why Austin, Pennsylvania, of all places? In the book, Saga of the Hills, there's an article entitled Promised Land. It stated, companies seeking strong, dependable, and persevering workers contacted folks in Sweden. One could buy a ticket from Gothenburg, Sweden, directly to Wilcox, Pennsylvania, which is near Austin. There, the Swedes found ready employment in the soft coal mines, in the tanneries, and in the woods, barking the hemlock for the tanneries. A certain Mr. Peterson, no relation, assisted many with transportation to the United States on their promise that they would work a winter in the woods barking those great trees. The brief history of Austin refers to the immigration of many Swedes. As those mills increased their outputs, the towns grew rapidly, and like all boom towns of the 80s, there was a motley assortment of people drawn into the valley. The Canadians, the Swedes, the Norwegians, et al. Into this melting pot came both religion and vice. There were Pig's Ears, which was a name for cheap saloons, where liquor was sold and gambling was the chief attraction, and houses of easy virtue filled with fancy girls on nearly every street. After the 1890s, there followed a period of 15 years where the militant evangelist, who had bathed in the Pentecostal fires of Dwight Moody religious fervor, stormed up and down the valley and preached the hell, good and hot, were the two towns which were likened to Sodom and Gomorrah. Such were the times of Austin, Pennsylvania.
Austin, Pennsylvania, at the turn of the century, was noted for its timber, lumber, and sawmills, and was quite a hot area. The major companies, such as Goodyear, etc., owned timber tracts throughout northwestern Pennsylvania, including areas in Sheffield. We believe he was sent to Sheffield. There he was in an accident. He was, that was in the sawmill in Sheffield, right? I think that's what it, yeah.
Breaking up lumber in his shoulder.
Oh, it ran right through his shoulder, yeah.
Accident in a sawmill in Sheffield, Pennsylvania. And he spent a long time in the Warren Hospital. I'm not sure how long it was, though. And he knew he had to do different kind of work. His left arm became shorter as it was screwed together with many tiny gold screws. And even when I was 10 years old, he'd come down into the kitchen every once in a while on Chapman Street and show us a tiny screw that he had picked out of the skin of his arm. And he said, well, it just worked its way out. He had much pain in his arm and his shoulder, but sure didn't complain at all, we thought.
He had this injury in the sawmill. They transferred him to a hospital in Warren, and the surgeon there asked him if he could try a new treatment. And the new treatment consisted of gold screws that were attempted to screw the bone pieces together, and I guess line them up and heel. But for years after that, he would get, I guess, abscess in that around his bone and drainage, and you could see many scars where those drainages were accomplished. His intent, apparently, was that he was going to return after 2 years when he saved a little money, but he was injured in a sawmill in what's that place?
Sheffield?
Sheffield, yeah. That it took all his money. There was no workman's compensation those days, and it drained him dry, so he didn't get back to the old country till after World War I.
He abandoned his plans to return to Sweden, but he did return to Sweden in 1920 and again in 1928 to visit his folks who were not well then. On September 17th,
that he didn't want to work in sawmill anymore, and opened up a little restaurant in Sheffield. And
I can't picture Daddy having a restaurant,
well,
can you?
I can't either, because
he sure didn't do much in the kitchen at all.
I don't think he knew much about cooking, but he did hire some women who probably knew how to cook, and they were a rather rough group down there, and I would guess you didn't have to put on too fancy a table.
Well, I think they were all the people that worked in the sawmill, so they were really lumbermen that came into the restaurant.
Yeah.
And I remember once he was so honest, one of the, he tells me one of the lumbermen came in and he had been drinking, and he gave Daddy his whole paycheck for Daddy to keep until he got through the weekend, and then he would, then he picked up the paycheck after that because he was scared he was going to spend it all on drinking. So Daddy held his money for him until, and they could trust Daddy because he was honest. They knew he was an honest man, so he left his money with Daddy. It's one of the things I remember from the restaurant. I don't. He didn't sit
Well,
too
the
much time.
other thing apparently that I was told, the Salvation Army had a satellite corps down there, a few soldiers, and that he used to attend that.
And he became involved with the Salvation Army and got permission to start a Sunday school down there. Is this the way you want me to?
Yeah, absolutely. It's terrific.
And he bought all the material himself and went around and collected children. He always loved children and was so concerned that they know the Lord. That meant so much to him.
Next few years, we know he was very active in the Salvation Army in the Warren area and traveled to places like Brookston, Pennsylvania, where ironically, Lyle's mother remembers him at street meetings there, and Ludlow, Pennsylvania, for various meetings. September 17, 1906, he decided to become a citizen of the U.S. He filed such a notice in Potter County, Coudersford, Pennsylvania, whereby he stated that he had resided in Pennsylvania since August 23, 1903. He spoke English and disavowed his allegiance to King Gustav V. On October 24, 1910, filed a petition for naturalization to become a citizen of the U.S. in Potter County, Pennsylvania, which is near Austin. One of the witnesses was Aaron Sandberg of Austin, who is described as a millman, and a John Anderson, who was a laborer. The petition states that he was a resident in Pennsylvania for 7 years. My dad became a citizen of the U.S. on March 16, 1911, when he signed his oath of allegiance. Time in 1910, he had come to Jamestown and took up boarding at 25 Linden Avenue, which was owned by Oscar Lindblom. Mr. Lindblom owned a meat market, and I'm sure this is where my dad first really learned how to become a meat cutter. He attended the Swedish Baptist Church, and this is where he met my mother. Edith Alfilda Erickson on October 28, 1884. How would you like to have a middle name like that? In the parish or village of Tilburga, which was in the province of Västermöland. She was brought up, however, in Smedjebacken in the province of Dalarna. It is here in North Dalarna province that the Dala horses are made, and today they keep up the old Swedish traditions and customs. There were 10 children in the family, and Edith was the third oldest. The oldest, Edward, was born in 1880, but died in 1883. The second was Knut Ephraim, who also died at a young age. Then our mom, Edith, followed by Carl, Sigrid Amelia, who married Erik Eriksson and had one child, Wald. David, who married Alma and had 5 children. All are living in Sweden, including Cornelia. Joseph, who lived in Connecticut and had 2 children. Stein, who married Lily and had 4 children. Larry, Gunny, Ike, and Ernie. Ruth, and then Esther Linnea, who was the last to be born in 1896. My mother's parents were Per Alfred Eriksson, who was always known as Carpenter Per Alfred Eriksson, and Sarah Endersdotter. is the oldest cousin on our side of the family,
Yeah.
which I never realized before, but of all the cousins, she's the oldest.
Yeah.
Parents were.
My grandpa was very strict.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted the boys and all the kids to obey everything. I mean, they could never open their mouth and say anything. In fact, they said they had a sofa in the kitchen, one of these wood-made sofa, and when he come in the door, they all sit on the sofa in a row, and the mother would tell everything bad they had done. And if he thought there would be some punishment, he would do that. So they were scared, really scared of their dad, because he was the one that did it.
He disciplined them.
Yeah.
Where did they live? Where did
They lived in Västerås, Sweden, and they had their own home, and their name was Hemmet, the home.
The home was named
Yeah.
Hemmet. Sweden when she was small. Well, what did they do for fun over there?
As fast as she quit school, they only have 6 years in school.
6.
Yeah, and they started when they were 7, and they have 6 years, and after that, when they quit that school, they just went out to work.
Okay.
They work for farmers and they work in families. So that's why she worked for this minister.
Oh, I see. She had worked for him before she came here.
Yeah, she worked there, see.
Oh, before she came
Yeah.
over here.
So
I
she
see.
was only 16. No?
Mm-hmm.
She worked there for a few years. That was the place she had.
Mm-hmm.
That's why she come here.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the parents thought it was a good thing for her to go over here and make living.
1902, Edith executed the leaving papers, which were documents required in order to depart from Sweden. The document states, among other things, that she is the daughter of carpenter pair Alfred Eriksson from Smedjebacken. She was born the 28th of October, 1884. That she is vaccinated and was not confirmed in the Swedish church. As you recall, the Church of Sweden was Lutheran.
At the age of 17, my mother signed a contract to transport her to the United States, May 9, 1902. The contract called for her to leave Gothenburg, travel by steamer to Hull, England within 48 hours, and from there travel by train to Liverpool by rail 3rd class, and from there take an ocean steamer to Boston, which would take 12 days, and from there by rail to Worcester, Massachusetts.
And she come with a minister. She worked for a minister in Sweden, and they asked her to help with the children when they were moving to America. And when she come over here, they told her to go out and have a job, for they couldn't afford to have her. So that's why she started to work in families.
She came to Jamestown, and like most female Swedish immigrants, she became a domestic. She almost immediately went to work for Frank Field at 412 Spring Street in Jamestown. He was president of Aroma Coffee Company, located on Washington Street. The home is now a parking lot for the Altel Company. She boarded with the Fields as a domestic until 1909. Ruth says that Mother was a chambermaid and made 75 cents a week. They gave her room, board, and uniform. Mother saved her money so that she could bring Aunt Sigrid over to America the next year. She then worked for Morgan B. Kent at 333 East 4th Street as a domestic. This home now is a parking lot for the Eagles Lodge. Mom became a citizen through marriage with Dad.
Didn't have much money at all. She made about $1.50, $2 a week, and she worked very hard. And in fact, she started to save money to go back to Sweden and see her parents, her parents. And she had saved up $500, and the bank went bankrupt, and she lost it all. And she said, there was my trip to Sweden, and I never wish to go back anymore.
She went to work for people in her homes as a maid and as a cook. And she had many fond memories of those days because the people she worked for, I guess, liked her. And she used to tell about the man of the house coming down in the kitchen and spending a lot of time, I guess, teaching her things. She helped teach the English language. And,
she learned the English language.
And also they taught her to cook.
In Jamestown, she was very active in the young people's group of the Swedish Baptist Church.
Well, when he came to Jamestown, he met Mother at Chandler Street Baptist Church. And he gave her a diamond ring on the hospital hill here.
No kidding.
Huh?
That's terrific.
And on a midsummer night, they were married the following Thanksgiving in 1911.
Dad were engaged on the hospital hill in June 1911. My mother and Dad were married on November 30th, 1911 at the home of her brother David. The minister was Carl Aldine. My mother's attendants were her sister, Sigrid Eriksson, and Esther Sandberg, daughter of Ada Sandberg. My dad was accompanied by Joseph Eriksson, Mother's brother, and Eric Eriksson. The marriage was on Thanksgiving Day.
Same time, your mother was nursing, see, would it be Ruth? Is Ruth next in line? Yeah. She was sitting in a rocking chair in the kitchen by the sink, and I had never seen this happen in all my life before. She'd taken one breast out, and she was nursing Ruth. And my dad went over and said something to her, and she picks her up and squirts it in my dad's face. Oh, never having seen anyone's breast exposed before, I just stood there in shock, naturally, and I was all eyes.